provided by Carolina's. Also make sure if you haven't signed the sign-in sheet over by the door, please do so on your way out. The Liberty Project is pleased to host the first part of a three-part speaker panel series titled Then, Then, and Now, Reproductive Rights Before and After Roe and Into Our Future. Today's panel discussion will focus on life before the landmark decision Roe v. Wade was handed down. My name is Erin Collins, and I'm a second-year law student here at the Sandra O'Connor College of Law, and I'm the president of Liberty Project. The Liberty Project is a think tank made up of law schools, law students, young lawyers, and others interested in preserving and protecting reproductive rights and sexual health. The Liberty Project was formed here at ASU 7 years ago by Leon Silver and Rebecca Lumley, both of whom are here today. Leon and Rebecca are both ASU law grads and both business trial attorneys at Polsinelli Sugar. Leon remains our community advisor and will serve as the moderator of our discussion following the presentation. And now on to our speakers. Kristin Atwell is a documentary filmmaker. She recently won an Emmy Award for writing and co-directing Theodore Roosevelt Dam, Arizona's Living Legacy, a film that will be shown locally on Channel 8 in April. Currently, she's producing a Sentinel series hosted by Justice Sandra O'Connor. One of the goals of the series is to bring back civil discourse to Arizona politics. Good luck with that. Sherri Chessen is the former Miss Sherri of the Phoenix version of Romper Room and was the one-time center of a national abortion controversy. Stan Lubin is a longtime supporter of Planned Parenthood. In 1998, he received the Let Freedom Ring Legal Community Leadership Award for his career-long commitment to the organization and its mission. Stan is one of Arizona's best-known labor and employment lawyers, and has been listed as Best Lawyer in America every year since its inception in 1981. He also teaches in the ASU College of Law, Literature, Arts and Sciences, School of Social Transformation, Department of Justice, and Social Inquiry. And with that, Kristin?
Hi there, thank you so much for having us here as part of your Liberty Project series. I'm going to talk to you just for a few minutes about what life was like for women before abortion was legalized in '73. My understanding is that many of you might be in the position in Arizona today to help minors find their way through judicial bypass, since we are a parental consent state. And that's not unlike many of the activists in the 50s and 60s who were working, primarily in the 1960s, working in different parts of the country to legalize or make abortion more accessible where they lived. Abortion was first criminalized in this country in the 1860s to 1880s. It was legal and it was usually administered by midwives, but the medical establishment wanted to take it over and have some control over it. So we essentially had a century of criminalization for abortion. We're primarily going to focus today on the 1950s and 60s because we have the best stats from that era. At that, we only know that there was something in the ballpark between 200,000 and 1,200,000 illegal or self-induced abortions taking place each year. And that's a pretty big swing. Some of the more concrete stats have to do with 1960s in New York City hospitals. 1 in 4 childbirth or pregnancy-related deaths for white women involved either a back alley or a self-induced abortion, and it was 1 in 2 for Black and Puerto Rican women. So you can imagine that this is something that was happening a lot. And a lot of the side effects from, so sorry to talk to you about this during lunch, but a lot of the side effects from self-induced abortions were incomplete abortions leading to septicemia. There were a lot of perforated uteruses. Women who didn't die from basically unsafe medical practices were often maimed or couldn't have children at a later date. It made what is essentially, when you strip away the politics, a fairly safe and straightforward procedure, something that caused a lot of devastation among childbearing women of a certain age. Now, in the 1960s, if you lived in New York City and you wanted to see a friend get a safe abortion, you might have found a way to refer her to the Clergy Counseling Network. It's kind of hard to believe now with what we've seen in the 1980s and the 1990s, but there were clergy members who would actually feed women into a network of safe abortion providers. People like Dr. Robert Spencer, who practiced, he was just a family doctor in the Pennsylvania coal region. And between 1925 and 1969, when he died, he performed some 40,000 safe abortions. But that was the exception, not the rule. If you lived in Chicago, you might have been part of the Jane Collective. And the Janes were a group of women who realized that many of the so-called back alley abortion providers weren't even doctors. And when they realized that these people who were providing abortions weren't even doctors, they thought, if they can do it, we can do it. And this was a group of women with no medical background who learned safe procedure and performed, let's see, over 12,000 abortions between 1969 and 1973. Now, as the movement and the awareness for safe abortion began to grow, New York State was one of the first states to actually legalize it in 1970 in their legislature. And one of the arguments was by a legislator named Constance Cook. And she said, you know, people are worried about abortion on demand. But she says, we have abortion on demand right now. If a woman wants an abortion, she's going to find one. She's going to insert Lysol in a douche. She's going to end up in the back alleys. There was a woman in Duluth called Willow Stick Annie who would insert items into the cervix until it swelled, and hoping that the pregnancy would expel. Just horrendous things that women our age were doing to themselves. Now you might wonder why a woman like me, who's grown up essentially with Roe v. Wade, would be interested in life before Roe v. Wade. And one of the things I found in working on a documentary series with a filmmaker named Dorothy Fadiman is that almost everyone has a reproductive story, because abortion is really one point of a whole spectrum of what can happen in the lifetime of a woman in terms of their reproductive health care. And my story is, I was born into a family that 50 years ago this summer in Arizona, my mother was in need of an abortion and unwilling to access an illegal or an unsafe abortion. She felt that she deserved a medical procedure, and her speaking out for that caused an international firestorm. She ended up leaving Arizona and traveling all the way to Sweden to get an abortion procedure, which might sound kind of ridiculous, but when you think that this is 11 years before Roe versus Wade, it gives you an idea of what the climate was. And really what the significance of what my mother went through in Arizona is that it broke the silence. We're very accustomed these days to the press descending on a family or a person and suddenly knowing everything about them. The only press coverage that there was ever about abortion prior to 1962 that you'd find in a newspaper would be that a woman was found dead or a doctor had been arrested for performing them. So my mother's story really broke open the debate and made abortion something that was brought out into the open and not just something that was whispered about or that happened in dark alleys and dark rooms. I could tell you more about that experience, but since I wasn't there, I will have my mother, who happens to be here, tell you about what she went through in Arizona 50 years ago this year.
I'll tell you a little secret about Kristin. She's number 6 for me. I finally got it right. And it was about 8 years after my abortion that she was born. Uh-oh, they'll do the math. Anyway, I got, at that time, while I was pregnant, a letter from 2 geneticists at the University of Maryland saying that they had proven that thalidomide caused permanent mutations of a mother's genes, and any subsequent baby would be born defective. So I give you, law students, Exhibit A. Perfect. Anyway, I'd like to give you kind of an oversight of what it was like for your grandmothers 50 years ago. In 1962, there were, I've been told, about 300 abortions done in Phoenix, Arizona in the name of a good old D&C. Unfortunately, mine was not one of them. Even though I had inadvertently taken a drug called thalidomide that was actually poisoning the fetus. It was stopping the development of the arms and the legs if you took it at just a certain time. It was called phocomelia. Well, in May of 1962, I probably thought I was living the American dream. I was married to a Scottsdale school teacher coach. I was the hostess, or teacher as they like to call it, on Romper Room, which was primary school, preschool, on Channel 12 here, an hour a day. And we had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and I was pregnant for the 5th time. Well, come back with me a year from then. Before, in 1961, my husband Bob had escorted to England high school students, and they got off to a really bad start. So when he got to England, he went to a doctor, got a prescription for some tranquilizers, took what he needed, and put the rest in his camera case and brought them home. He put them up way high because all our children were under 7 years old. Well, I was pregnant, and I also always had morning sickness, which is a misnomer because it can happen any time of the day. I was doing Romper Room, and Romper Room was an active part on the part of the teacher. We rode little horses, drank chocolate milk, ate cinnamon rolls, and really played with the kids. I wanted to keep working as long as I could because I loved my job, and we needed the $75 a week I received for 5 hours of live television. Anyway, here's where I made my mistake, and I admit it. One day I thought, well, you know, my tummy wouldn't be so queasy if I had a tranquilizer. I can remember to this day taking a chair, putting it up to the sink, crawling on the chair, on the counter, and taking down from above the sink the medicine that my husband, that was for somebody else, and I took it for the next few weeks. Then I saw an article buried on probably page 23 of the Arizona Republic that talked about doctors in England trying to get a law passed that would allow them to practice euthanasia on the part of babies that were being born without their arms and legs. I mean, I could hardly read it, but I didn't equate it with myself because they called it a sleeping drug. And as the women know, you don't have to have anyone help you sleep when you're first pregnant. Anyway, the next day, they did a follow-up story, and they called it a tranquilizer, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to bring this medicine to my doctor and have him see what it is. So he kind of poo-pooed it, but he said, bring it in and we will, they're leaving already.
He'll be back.
Oh, he'll be back, okay. The doctors called me back a couple days later and said, I want you and your husband in my office Saturday morning. He showed me a telegram that said, because my pill did not say thalidomide, the bottle said Distoval, D-I-S-T-O-V-A-L. And they said that Distoval was thalidomide and the word strong in parentheses. Well, he said to me then, Sherri, if you were my wife, and we also have 4 small children, I'm going to tell you the same thing I would tell her. If you really want to have a 5th baby, let's terminate this pregnancy and start again next month under better odds. Intellectually, it sounded perfect, but emotionally, I was a wreck. And I need some water because I'm thinking about it. Thank you, Kristin. Sorry. He also said to me, your operation is going to be Wednesday at Good Samaritan Hospital. And I said, oh, no. I can't. Wednesday is Mark's birthday, one of the little boys that you saw in that picture and I can't go then. And I really would like to go to St. Joseph's because that's where my last baby had been born a year and a half previously. So you know what you're dealing with, little Miss Naive. He said, you cannot have an abortion at a Catholic hospital. I mean, who knew? Anyway, I went home and the overwhelming feeling I had was, oh my gosh, I've got to warn other people. If we could get this drug in a remote corner of Arizona, the year before, a contingency of Air National Guard from Arizona had been in Germany when the Berlin Wall went up, because that's where the medicine was synthesized at the Chemnitz-Grunenthal plant. So I picked up the phone, and this is where one of my I'm interrupting myself, but one of my lawyer friends said, that's where you made your mistake, Sherri. Should have had the operation and then called the newspaper. But I happen to be very impulsive, and if it were today, I'd probably do it exactly the same way. I picked up the phone, called the newspaper, and the editor's wife said to me, our medical reporter, Julian DeVries, is doing a article on thalidomide. May he call you? And I said, well, sure, but he won't use my name, will he? And she said, oh my dear, of course not. So on Monday morning, I was very surprised to pick up the paper and see on the front page of the paper a black bordered article with the title, Baby Deforming Drug May Cost Woman Her Child Here. It went on to say Scottsdale school teacher, 4 small children, but graciously it did not say romper room because that would have narrowed it down considerably. So Monday morning I went in to do romper room, not knowing it would be the last time I was ever allowed to do the show. After the program was over, and we're coming up to my favorite part, the production manager called me and said, Sherri, you have a phone call, take it in my office. So I called, it was my doctor. He said the county attorney just came out with an announcement that they would perform a citizen's arrest on whoever that person was, whoever the doctor was, and whoever the hospital was. So my doctor said, your operation is canceled. I stood there and I can still feel, even though it's been 50 years, my blood start to boil. So what did I do? I called the county attorney's office. And a young attorney answered the phone, and I said, I would like to know what the county attorney has to do with a private citizen's right to do what she thinks is best for her family. There was a pause, and he said, I know who you are. I had the flu last week, and I have a 4-year-old daughter named Valerie, and every day from 11 to 12, we watched you on Romper Room. You're Miss Sherri, and I want you to know I so believe in what you're doing that I'd like to help you, and I will do it pro bono. And that's how Charlie Stevens became my attorney. Anyway, I'm kind of mixed up on what happened next, because the next thing I knew, I opened the door, and what I thought, there was a man standing there with guns, and I thought they were going to take me to jail. Of course, one of my sons was so, can I see your guns, and is that real, and do you have bullets? And they put me in the hospital at Good Sam, while the hospital debated whether they were going to violate their own creed of helping somebody who was in medical need. The next morning, I had a radio in there, and I found out from New York that my hospital had ousted me. So they decided then, I don't know if it was the hospital and Charlie Stevens and his partner, whose name was Howard Lebo, and my doctor, but they decided to go to court to try to get a declaratory judgment on the word life in the existing Arizona law that said an abortion is legal if necessary to save the life of the mother. But did I have to be dying on the table, or their tack was going to be I would lose my mental health. It would be just too much, too overwhelming. So they sent me to 2 psychiatrists here so they could be, I guess, expert witnesses for them. The first psychiatrist spent 2 hours with me with the most atrocious flashcards I've ever seen. I know he was trying to get me to admit that I had some kind of ulterior or sexual or evil, illicit reason for wanting this abortion. And I was giving him sassy, impudent answers, like Psychology 1A, and I just wouldn't play his game because it was so obvious. Well, he not only recommended termination, he recommended sterilization. Sorry, Christy. And he then recommended that they take away my 4 children because I wasn't capable of taking care of them. Well, I had to see 2 psychiatrists, so the next day I went into Good Sam, fully expecting more of the same. And this doctor comes in, and he says, I was sitting there on the edge of the chair, and he says, honey, sit on the sofa and have a donut. And I said, have a donut? And he said, I'm going to read the paper. And I said, we're not going to talk? And he said, hey, I've already decided, I've already talked to them, I don't want to put you through anything else. So they went into court, and the judge, who was Yale McFate of Miranda fame here, and he said, as a man, I'd like to rule on this case. As a judge, I cannot. And I don't know why he couldn't, but that was his statement, and he threw it out of court. So now I was dismissed by just about everybody. Then I started getting things from, we'll take you to Mexico, we'll parachute you out of a plane, and I knew the way I was, I'd probably break both legs and retain the pregnancy. My favorite one was fill a bathtub full of gin. And I can't remember if I was supposed to drink it or sit in it, but that was supposed to do the trick. Anyway, it was bizarre. But I had 4 small children. They were my fiduciary responsibility, and I wasn't going to do anything that was medically risky. Well, the doctors here recommended that we go to Japan. At the time you could go to Japan, you need a $20 bill, you need to get into a taxi cab and say, hospital, and that was it. We got as far as Los Angeles, and the Japanese consul would not give us a visa. because they were afraid of anti-Japanese demonstrations on the part of Americans who disagreed with me. So now, where? And you know, it's not like when you're pregnant, you can sit around waiting for all these legal men, usually, to make determinations. I felt like I had a time bomb inside of me. So I remembered that somebody from Sweden had contacted us and said if we needed them, that they would take care of all the arrangements for the story, of course. Well, I went to Sweden, and like any Swedish citizen, I had to go through a 3-week interrogation with their abortion curator, with their psychiatrists, with their doctors, with even they went through your financial, welcome back, with their financial people, and finally then a 10-man medical board decided yes, that they would do the operation. Well, I'm going to leave this, excuse me, the story there, but the story didn't end there. As you can tell, by 50 years later, and it's getting harder to recall all these things, so I gotta hurry up. I came back and I lost my job, never did romper room again. An NBC vice president, a very elegant man, deemed I was unfit to handle children. He was, in my opinion, aptly named Ray Schmucker. And I know that's not very nice, but yeah. And the Sisters of St. Agnes cordoned Bob's high school, Arcadia High School room. The hate mail was horrific. I got pictures of myself with my eyes gouged out, blood dripping down, and God knows what. But the worst thing was the FBI sent 2 armed people to escort my kindergarten and first grade children to school for about 6 weeks. All this because I needed an abortion. So that's what it was like. Maybe you can talk to your grandmas and they'll remember the story. People said that I was going to be cursed, but I have been blessed. 2 more wonderful kids, a life that had a lot of bumps. I now write children's books, www.thegorp.com. And if you ever need a book to kind of fill in the spaces on Before Roe v. Wade, I did not write this. Linda Greenhouse, Before Roe v. Wade, fabulous book. One little quick story about her, she used to cover the Supreme Court for the New York Times. She won a Pulitzer Prize. And when she would come, all the justices would gussy up. So it became known as the greenhouse effect, because they would want to look good for her because she was going to write about them. Thank you very much, and maybe in the questions and answers we can fill in any blank spaces for you. Thank you.
I remember the brouhaha over this, yeah.
Good memory.
Yeah. And I'm honored to be here with you. I brought something with me. Anybody know what this is? Most of us probably think this is a hanger, but this was an abortion tool. This is the back alley scalpel, or whatever, that they used to do the D&Cs and kill women. A lot of women died as a result of these. And I just thought, since none of you were alive back then, that it might be an idea for you to see what they use in the back alleys. This is the reason why, one of the many reasons why Roe v. Wade must remain the law of the land. Nobody wants an abortion. Who wants to go through that? If you go back, way back to the Civil War times and before, abortions were legal back then. They were made illegal back then because the death rate was so high, because surgeries of any sort were very dangerous back then. But as time went on, and other, medicine improved, surgery improved, that became less and less of a problem, but then we began to get into political problems, religious issues, and all that. I'm here today not as a lawyer. I was asked to come in here because of an experience that I went through. I know, I'm a male. I did not have an abortion. As to why I think it's so important and why I got into some of the things that I've done with Planned Parenthood all these decades. And before I finish, before I forget, I don't know how many of you know that yesterday, Planned Parenthood of America raised $650,000. It's the single biggest day they've ever had in fundraising. And it just about equals the amount of money that the Komen Foundation used to give to the national organization. I don't know how much the local chapters raised or how much that they've replaced, but this issue is not going to go away, and it shouldn't. Let me get back to my story, the reason I'm here. When I was about 17 or 18 years of age, I was planning on going out of state for college. I grew up in New York City, and I was dating a young girl who was about a year or two younger than me. She was about 16 or 17, and we were going out for quite a while, nothing real serious, but because she just didn't want to go to school after high school, she didn't want me to leave the city. I just had to get out of New York City for other reasons, parents and all that sort of thing. And so I left to go to school, and we broke up over that. She started dating somebody else, and about a year later got pregnant. Now, the poor thing did not know about the institutions that Sherri has talked about, and she ended up with what she thought was a doctor who did abortions. She met him somewhere in Brooklyn, in one of the seedier sections of Brooklyn. They went into this place, wherever it was, and she never came out alive. She died. Now, we had broken up, but you know, I still knew her. I still felt badly about it, and it really started grinding on me why this kind of thing should happen. Now, I was safely ensconced at the University of Michigan at the time. Could have just forgotten it and moved on, but you don't forget things like that. It could have been something that happened earlier, it could have happened later. And when you read about that stuff and you live it, it's two different things. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, she made a mistake and unfortunately she paid for it. But when you know the person, it really hits home. Even though you're not responsible, you're not involved, it has nothing to do with me, it just happened to be a former girlfriend. And that got me to the point where I said, well, this is something we have to do something about. I never had much of an opportunity to. I had always done some volunteer work for Planned Parenthood while in Ann Arbor. Then after that, when I started working, I started getting involved in things. Went to law school, graduated, and then started volunteering again. When I came out here in 1972, I got involved out here with Planned Parenthood a little bit. And one of the things that I started getting into, and some of this is a little post-row, Arizona is not that different than much of the rest of the country on being afraid to allow women to have total liberty over their bodies. We're not alone. We're not, it's not like the immigration issue, where we're sort of out in God knows what village. But because the vast bulk of the country is in the same mood. And it's not anything to do with safety. In fact, it's anti-safety. It's got nothing to do with honor. I think it's anti-honor. It's basically people controlling half the population. And I think that's why we all need to be aware of this. If there's anything that I can think of, that you can think of that's more sacrosanct than you control over your own body, your own reproductive organs, or any one part of your body, I'd like to know what it is. There is no liberty more important, physically at least, than this. And my former girlfriend's death brought that home to me, and I sure as hell don't want to see us go back there. I don't like these. I don't even like them as a hanger. You know, they leave wrinkles. But, you know, let's keep it safe, let's keep it clean, and let's keep it honest and above board, and let's not make it into a a political issue any longer. We really have to get away from that. One last thought, and Leon told me I could talk a little bit post-Roe. Back when when Arizona started passing laws against abortions, one of the first laws that passed was parental consent. And the very first case that I ever handled in this arena was before a judge. It was a parental consent bypass on behalf of a young woman who was 3 months short of her 18th birthday. 3 months. She and her boyfriend had been sexually active for about 2 years, and they made a mistake. She got pregnant. They both wanted to go to college. They weren't ready to get married. They didn't want to lose out on the ability to basically grow up a little bit more before they took on that responsibility. So they decided that they wanted to have an abortion. His parents were all for it. Her parents, she was afraid to tell them because her parents were divorced. And even though they were divorced, her mother would have told her father, and her father was abusive, both physically and mentally. And she was afraid that he would beat her. So she couldn't talk to them, she felt. So she came to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood sent her to me, and we went into court. We went into the state court first, and the judge said, well, gee, I understand, but you should tell your mother. If my daughter were pregnant, I wish you would tell me. I would hope that you would tell me. Ignoring all the fact that this was not the same family situation. She ruled against it, so we went to federal court. And the interesting thing was I had a judge in the federal court who was very much anti-choice, very much so. And he said, and he had just ruled in a pornography case that certain things had to be allowed to be said and spoken about over the phone, etc. And he said, Stan, did you know, his name was Judge Hardy, a really good judge. He said, you do know that my church is already pissed off at me for the abortion, for the pornography decision. Now you're going to get me kicked out practically. I said, well, Judge, if it's too much, recuse yourself and we'll just, we'll assign it to another judge. That's all, you can do that. He said, no, I know my responsibilities. I know what Roe v. Wade said, and he signed the order. That judge was a brave man because the furor that broke out over that case almost cost him his membership in his church. He had to switch to a different location to go to church where they didn't know him because the people in his church in his particular church were too so anti what he did. They were hounding him and his wife. So that's the kind of emotions this raises. This is post-Roe, I realize. Pre-Roe, it was worse. Sherri, you are a miracle lady. I really admire you for what you did, and I applaud you for what you did. And I remember that I was one of the people who sent a letter to Channel 12 telling them I was never going to watch their stupid channel again.
Thank you.
And I didn't for a long time. With that, Leon, all's yours.